Yeah, so we're now going to turn to what we had intended to do with this session was to handle the Q&As that we'd been getting, sort of the questions that we've been getting directly by email and phone calls from members over the last 2 or 3 weeks. And so we invited our friends at Pivotal Solutions, that's Mike Salvetta and Kelsey Livesay, to help us to respond to some of those questions. They're going to run through a bit of a presentation here on managing HR issues. They'll tackle some of those questions and then talk a little bit about some general advice. Pivotal Solutions is a human resources consulting firm with which HRAI has a solid and long-standing relationship. And so I'm very happy to have Mike and Kelsey join us. And just one other quick point before they start. The questions, you can continue submitting your questions. We'll try as the staff here to sort through those, and some of them are questions I believe that Mike and Kelsey can address. And once again, if we're not able to get to your question before the end of today's session, we will try to post all of the answers on our website in due course. Mike, are you there? Ready to join?
I am. Can you hear me?
Okay. Yes, the stage is yours.
Okay, good.
Thanks for joining.
Okay, do I have control over the slides, or if I click them, I guess I will?
Nope, nope, it's Loretta. So just tell me when to forward.
Okay, no problem. So welcome everyone, good afternoon, and thanks for joining the HRAI COVID-19 session. Today what I'm going to do, I'm going to focus more on the HR side of things, the people side of things, not necessarily all the legislative side. So I'm going to go through a lot of the questions we get asked as HR people. I'll also talk about some cost reduction strategies, and more importantly too, also making sure that your business is prepared for when we inevitably come out of the situation we're in. Okay, so the first question, if you can click it. Okay, it's my understanding that we're strongly encouraged to try to keep each of our employees working if possible. We've had a few sites shut down due to health and safety concerns. So this statement is only going to apply to you if you qualify for the federal wage subsidy, which I'm sure Francesco went over in full detail. If you qualify for that subsidy, and today it was announced that the 30% qualification period for March has been dropped to 15%, and then April and May remains at 30. If you qualify for that, the intent of the program, and businesses are strongly encouraged to use that subsidy to try to bring as many people back as possible. And as much as you may be able to have the ability to pay, keep them at 100%. But those are definitely only qualifications if you're collecting the federal wage subsidy. For those who are not, and only qualify maybe for the 10% subsidy, you're free to balance your headcount and cost based on your workload and revenue requirements. So especially now that the construction, or a lot of the construction sites, are shut down, I think when I get to the cost reduction strategies, there may be some questions around how to utilize them to your best advantage to balance headcount and cost. Next. Okay, we are being told that we have to pay severance packages to employees that are being placed on temporary layoff. And temporary layoff could be to the end of June, it could be farther. So this is probably one of the biggest asked questions. You know, it's a catch-22. I don't want to put people on layoff and pay them severance because I'm putting them on layoff to reduce my costs. So technically, all unilateral changes to an employment contract could be constructive dismissal. But in this scenario, it's a long shot. There's lawyers arguing daily in the papers around is it or isn't it. Constructive dismissal was generally a concept in law identified for singular changes, not pandemics, global crises, those type of things. Organizations for years have been doing temporary layoffs. The only time you'll actually get into some trouble, though, is if you're singling out a worker or a group of workers. That could be constructive dismissal. So if all of a sudden the only people with shortage of work are your employees that are 59 or above, or disabled or injured or something along that line, then you may be in a position where you've discriminated either through human rights or a constructive dismissal. But generally, you can lay off temporarily as long as you're not discriminating or singling out a worker or a group of workers. So some of the guidelines that I like to make sure that you do, make sure if you're laying off temporarily, it's in writing. Say it's temporary and it has a recall date of X or Y. You can extend layoffs for 13 weeks or 35 weeks if you continue your benefit programs. Once that recall date has passed, though, and the employee hasn't been recalled, they're then deemed terminated and termination pay would then be paid. Okay. Do you have any information of how the Employment Standards Act applies for people that have been with a company for over 10 years? There's actually only one difference in the Employment Standards Act, and it actually comes at 5 years. So if you have to terminate somebody, these are the 3 items that you have to look at. So the first is notice or pay in lieu of notice. And that is generally 1 week per year of service up to 8 years of service. Notice can be worked, so you can give working notice for the 8-week period, or you give them no notice and you give them 8 weeks pay, or 1 week per year of service as pay. The second item, and this is really something I always encourage employers to keep their eye on, once an employee, if you have a $2.5 million annual payroll or greater, once an employee crosses the 5-year threshold, they're now entitled to statutory severance. And statutory severance equals 1 week per completed year of service up to 26 weeks. Now, so for example, somebody was with an organization for 10 years, they would get 8 weeks notice, 10 weeks severance, assuming that the payroll was over 2.5 million. Now, those are the statutory provisions. What's probably more unnerving and probably the best reason to make sure you always have a valid termination clause in every employment agreement, even a technician's agreement. It can be a half-page employment agreement saying you're starting on this date, this is your rate, this is who you work for, these are your hours, and any terms and conditions that are not in written company policy or this letter will fall under the Employment Standards Act 2000. By making that statement, then you limit yourself in a termination to just notice and or severance if applicable. Without that termination clause, you open yourself up to what's called common law. And common law just means a judge decides what the proper notice and severance will be. And the minimum statute is the starting point. What they look at is age, position, salary, how the industry is doing, how skilled is the employee, and how likely is it that they're going to get alternative employment within some period of time. It's kind of a guessing game, but they have different standards that they follow. And let's say a 10-year, 55-year-old technician was terminated and didn't have an employment clause. They're going to get the 8 weeks notice for sure, the 10 weeks severance for sure, and probably based on their age, another 6 to 10 weeks of common law. So that's why having employment agreements is absolutely critical, because it limits your termination to notice and or severance if applicable. Next.
Oops, sorry, just one moment.
It's okay.
Here we go.
Okay, this is a big one. I answer this question every 2 days. Are companies paying risk pay to technicians or anybody for that matter? Some have been paying a premium, but from an HR perspective, we're strongly recommending against using the term risk or danger pay or anything like that, or COVID-19 pay or anything along that line. If you want to pay a premium, I always say that you need to find something performance related to structure it against. Employees, if work is available, employees are expected to return to work and do the job unless there's a bona fide work refusal or a medical condition that would justify staying away. So somebody with a compromised immunity system, or they've been exposed to somebody who may have tested positive for COVID-19 or in the possible exposure. So those people would have a bona fide reason not to come to work. But anybody else, if it's safe, they're expected to be at work. If they complain or refuse, they'll have to follow the Occupational Health and Safety Act workplace refusal process. But if you want to encourage people to come to work and pick up those extra shifts or whatever it is that you need them to do, pick something that's more performance oriented. So a successful repair, no rework, no fail, done within the appropriate time period, hit all the quality measures, whatever it is. And then, you could apply a premium per hour or something along that lines to encourage people to come out and do the work that the organization needs done. Not because it's risky, not because it's danger pay, because we're in a tight spot, we don't have a lot of work, and the work we have, we need to get done. So it's an incentive rather than a risk. Next. So this is an obvious one. You've probably heard this tons of times, but if somebody says they have symptoms or has been exposed to somebody, you need to send this person home. You need to make sure that they've consulted with a medical professional or public health. Most medical professions now are doing phone clinics. It's highly unlikely you'll see anybody at the office, but you can definitely connect via Zoom or some other method with most doctors today. They need to unless the person was absolutely tested positive, they need to self-quarantine for 14 days. You need to protect the privacy of this individual, but you also need to protect the need to know of any employees who work very closely to them and were in the path of travel of that employee. All they need to do at this point, they don't need to quarantine, but they should self-monitor for symptoms. One of the best practices we're recommending is most cleaning companies have quickly jumped into the void and are offering deep disinfecting programs. And you could, if there is a defined path, tool sets, toolboxes, vans, pretty much anywhere where the employee would have been in the path of travel, you could have these people come in and deep disinfect that workplace. And I know this is very difficult, but educating your coworkers on social distancing in the workplace, the government standard is 2 meters. I like to try to push for an extra meter if possible. Make sure you stagger or try to stagger breaks and lunches and shifts. So not having a crew of 3 guys sitting together in a small circle eating lunch. Better that they're completely separated, perhaps at different times, and really working hard to encourage and keep social distancing. Next.
Okay. Yep.
Sorry. So now we've had somebody, let's say, tested for COVID-19. It changes the world a little bit for an employer. They cannot come back. The 14-day timeline is just a guideline for people that have tested positive for COVID-19. Not until you get on the government's recovered list should you be permitted to come back to the workplace, and they track infections and recovereds. Anybody that's worked closely with them, now they need to be removed from the workplace, and instead of just self-monitoring, they need to sit off for 14 days and try to contain any possible infections. The guidelines are people who work closely with the infected employees. So there's no definition of what closely is. So I would think it would depend on the type of interactions between employees and the type of work that they do. If they're shoulder to shoulder, that's pretty close. If they're in a workshop separated by 10, 20, 30 feet, probably not so close. If you're unsure, if you've asked yourself the question more than twice, I wonder if that's too close. Probably it is, and send them home. And if there is any other measures, no, it's okay, I got it. If there's any other measures to protect the privacy of the employee, do that. In a very small employer, it's hard to protect the privacy of one individual who's missing, but you know, try to assure people that it's under control, you've done what you're supposed to do, and that's it. Okay. So this is, a lot of people are finding they're laying off people. They'd like to take advantage of the 35-week layoff period, but have found that their benefits don't go that far. So I can tell you, having looked at, dozens and dozens of different benefit companies and different plans, the terms are different. You're going to have to dig into your policy and check the benefit plan document itself. Not necessarily the little employee handbook that usually hides all the bad news, but actually in the benefit plan document, it will tell you whether or not laid off people are covered. Are they covered only for 13 weeks? Any exclusions to the plan. So I would encourage you, if you're planning layoffs, make sure that you review policies first, understand your benefit plan, get some advice from your provider if necessary, because you don't want to tell people they're covered when in fact they're not. And they have an issue and they go to put a benefit claim in or a significant benefit claim in, and the benefit carrier rejects it. So make sure we understand what your plan does and doesn't cover, and communicate appropriately. Next. Okay, this is probably one you're going to face, and if you haven't faced it yet, you probably will. But anybody that says, "Oh, I'm not sure. I'm kind of concerned. I don't feel right. My family members are putting pressure on me not to go to work." All these things. They are actually valid and official workplace refusal to work claims. So they don't actually have to say, "I'm refusing to come to work for safety reasons." If you feel that they are refusing to come to work because of some sort of a safety reason, then you're bound by the Occupational Health and Safety Act to do a proper workplace refusal inspection. And the process is outlined, whether you're federally or provincially regulated, and you have to follow it. When a work refusal is reasonable will depend on the individual, the information you uncover, etc. But when you're investigating these concerns, you will talk to the people that were in the workplace, whether or not there's been any concerns or symptoms or issues with employees. it'll probably boil down to current scientific understanding of COVID and whether or not the workplace is unsafe. If you deem it to be safe, the employee is actually bound to go back and perform the duties. If it's safe or unsafe, you can't reprise or discipline somebody for exercising a health and safety claim. Now, there is one part of this, so you're right. There's nothing wrong with the workplace. Everything's fine, everything's perfect, and the employee still doesn't want to go back to work. Under normal times, you definitely have a lot of levers to make the employee actually perform the duties. In COVID-19 times, I'm in a lot of cases recommending to people, it's absolutely pointless dragging this person back to work. The quality, the engagement, the bitching and complaining probably won't be worth winning the battle and losing the war. So if somebody really does not want to come to work, or they're terrified, or they are finding every excuse under the sun to stay off work, you're probably better to just leave them off work. Now, work's available, so I'm not suggesting they would go on EI. I'm suggesting they'd go on an unpaid leave of absence. Next. This may not apply to most of your people, but it probably applies to office people. So I'm sending a lot of people home to work. How do I know they're actually doing something? Any supervisory or monitoring processes that you would normally use in the workplace, you can continue to use for work at home workers. So if you normally have weekly calls or one-on-ones or some sort of a report or anything along those lines, you can do all of those while they're at work. What you can't do, or sorry, working from home, what you can't do is significantly change your supervisory monitoring processes. So, for example, I had somebody ask me, actually quite seriously, if they can put a internet log, time clock, log clock onto somebody's PC so they can watch how many keystrokes they're doing, when they were logged on, when they logged off. And I actually think they wanted to do video calls every 2 hours and see that they were working and at their desk. So that is definitely off bounds. That's a significant change in the supervisory controls that didn't exist before, so you're not going to be able to do that. I recommend creating a policy that'll outline all your expectations from service to availability that exist when somebody's working from the office. The standards shouldn't change, but they also shouldn't be less or dramatically more. Okay, let's talk about costs. So those are the typical FAQs that I get. I'm not going to talk about the payroll subsidy. First of all, they pulled a fast one on me an hour ago, and I'd already sent in my slides. So it's changed a little bit. And I'm sure Francesca did a good job telling you about the new changes and the payroll subsidy. All I'm going to say on the payroll subsidy is if you qualify, bar none, there is nothing else I can tell you to improve your cost position than this payroll subsidy. So if you're eligible, definitely follow the rules, understand how it works, and if you qualify for all 3 months, hopefully that's it's a significant benefit, and hopefully that'll carry you through until the other side of this thing. Next. A lot of employers are reducing compensation. So again, just like layoffs, I keep hearing, well, is it constructive dismissal? Technically, maybe. However, what most people don't realize about constructive dismissal is you actually have to quit. you can't keep your job and claim constructive dismissal. So you would have to take the position that the change was so significant that I've been fired. I can no longer continue to work for you under these circumstances. So the reason why I've been telling most employers, it's worth the risk is I don't think many people are going to do that in this economy. Actually quit. Quitting will probably 9 times out of 10 disqualify you from employment insurance. And there's not a ton of alternative employment opportunities out there at the moment. So most people are not going to likely take the path of constructive dismissal. What am I seeing? About 5 to 20%. A lot of people are saying 1 day, the equivalent of 1 day or a half a day of pay less, whether or not they're working 1 day less. So it is important, I think, to if you want to take the position of rather putting people on employment insurance, I don't qualify for the wage subsidy, but I need relief, and I also need access to people. A temporary compensation reduction might be a great way to do it. Next. The other way is to reduce hours of work. Again, it's a temporary unilateral reduction, but if you're going to reduce it, you could work 4 days a week without any EI assistance. You could lay off staff because they're going to be not needed more than 2 or 3 days a week, and then recall them for part-time work. Or if you think this is going to be a long, protracted problem, apply for a government program called work sharing. And work sharing is basically working and collecting EI for the hours you're not working. There's some terms and conditions and reporting requirements, but after the wage subsidy, the work sharing program is probably the most solid way to keep staff and reduce your costs and allow you to operate. If you put them on just the regular layoff and call them in and out for part-time work or odd jobs, usually it's only going to be for 2 or 3 days a week. You get up to 4 days a week and it's not worth it because the deduction from EI makes the person basically work for free on that 4th day. The only time it makes some sense is if you're on an official work share program. Next. Some employers are scheduling vacations unilaterally. You have the right as an employer to schedule vacations, provided that they're in week-long blocks. A lot of people are saying, well, I need you to take 2 days this week and 1 day next week and 3 days next week. Well, if the employee agrees, and my definition of agree means he's not going to phone up the labor board later and complain. If they agree, it's fine. But if it's somewhat not agreeable, then you're supposed to do it in week-long increments. It's a good strategy in a way, because when things pick up and you don't want people taking vacation, some of the vacation entitlement will have been burned off. On the other hand, it may be an angry employee if all their vacation gets sucked up in April while I'm stuck in my house. So I'm suggesting maybe a week. If somebody has 3 weeks entitlement, maybe a week, and keep 2 weeks for the nicer weather later so that they still have some sort of a vacation. Some employers are just putting people on unpaid leaves at the moment. And that could be due to the fact that they don't have all the skills necessary to do the available work. They don't have, they're not interested, they're afraid, they're non-properly work refusing, those type of things. So if you've got people that don't really qualify for a shortage of work, or or anything else, but you don't need them, you can give them a leave of absence, unpaid leave of absence. Next. And this is the one that is probably the most used. So the detail is if you put somebody on an unpaid layoff, it can be for 13 weeks in a 20-week rolling period if you don't cover benefits. And then if you do cover benefits, you can run that to 35 weeks in a 52 consecutive week period. And what will an employee get? They will get, under traditional shortage of work, 55% of their regular weekly earnings, up to $573. Now, as I said before, while they're on this program, they can work. So I'm going to make the math a little easier. Let's say the employee is entitled to $500 per week in EI. That's $100 a day. And they come back and work for you for 2 days, and they made, let's say, $400 in those 2 days. They would get to keep the $400, and 50% of the $400 gets deducted against their EI entitlement. So instead of getting $500 for EI, they would lose $200 for EI, but keep the $400 that you paid them plus the $300 remaining EI dollars. So they'd end up with $700 instead of $500 working 2 days a week for you. So it's a somewhat attractive program. It helps employees make a bit more money. It allows you access to the skilled labor you need when you need it, but it's not quite as good as WorkShare. But WorkShare comes with some restrictions. Next. And last but not least, I've had lots of people come to me and say, damn, that guy was lucky. I was just about to fire him, and then COVID-19 came up. So now I can't do anything. That's not necessarily true. You cannot dismiss or reprise against anybody for anything at all related to the medical side of COVID-19 or the caregiving side or anything like that. However, if there was performance issues, documented performance issues that you were in the midst of executing, and it had nothing to do with COVID-19, you can continue down that path and dismiss employees. You can also put them on temporary layoff, and when the temporary layoff runs out, pick up right where you were in the constructive discipline or the progressive discipline system that you may have. So it's not that you can't dismiss employees, but you have to be, it really should be based on one of two things: a bona fide documented performance problem, or I can't, at the end of the layoff period, there is not any work to be done, and I'm releasing them under that basis. And then 3 or 4 slides earlier, I told you how to calculate it and what the cost would be. Okay, here's a few things that are extra. These are kind of HR-ish kind of things. You know, at the end of the day, we will pull out of this storm. So if you have a good crew and you have a good workforce and you want to retain and maintain them, these are some of the things you can do. If you've got work, and I know with construction shutting down, that may have slammed that door shut, but prior to that, you know, you could have spread out the work schedules and try to get work done on off shifts and different times to keep people social distanced, safe, but also keeping workloads up. The WorkShare program, like I said before, if you do not qualify for the wage subsidy program, seriously consider getting the WorkShare program implemented. They have significantly reduced the requirements. They have sped up the approval process dramatically. And it is the best program out there for the next, foreseeable future. If you believe that you're going to have some reduction or a reduction, at least 10% reduction in revenue, and you want to retain and maintain your workforce, then Workshare is the way to go. Now, you don't have to worry about, you don't have a crystal ball. The Workshare program has 2 programs. Number one, you can cancel it at any time. So if you don't need it, turn it off. The second one is if you don't maintain a 10% reduction and at least 40% of work each week that the program runs for 6 weeks, then you'll automatically be kicked off. You'll be deemed to not need it, either because you can't maintain a minimum or you're over the maximum and you really don't need it. So it's a good program. It has some self-corrective features, and I'd highly recommend it if you see something 3 to 4 months out there, you need some help, and you're not going to qualify for the wage subsidy. Work at home for the office. People know that. Unpaid leave. If you've got a younger workforce, they may love a couple extra weeks of vacation unpaid. Of course, it may not necessarily pay off on April 8th, but the week of the May long weekend, the latter part of May, certainly those are weeks that would be, I think, welcome with a younger workforce, and maybe a younger workforce that may be living at home still. And one of the other things that I'm suggesting, whether your workforce is on layoff or not, amp up your communication. Don't let employees read stuff and start determining what may or may not apply to them. Get some, anything, a Zoom program, a WhatsApp. There's a number of software and contact softwares that you can put your team on and start communicating to them like you've never communicated before. Maybe a daily note from the CEO, check-ins, items from your benefits providers, a note about an EAP program that you may or may not have, or how to manage stress, or YouTube videos around wellness or stress. The more I think that you communicate and stay in touch with your workforce, the more connected and engaged they will remain. And that's going to be important for the next slide. Click. Okay. First thing, I believe, and I believe it strongly, that there was an article in the Toronto Star last week saying they're forecasting, and leading economists are forecasting, when we come out of this thing, the Canadian economy is going to boom. And I don't know if that's true or not, but whatever work is out there, I believe the company that retains their workforce, their quality workforce, but more importantly, has an engaged workforce. They want to come back. They're not looking for a job. They're happy to be back. Those companies are going to have a strategic advantage over their competitors. There's going to be a lot of business out there that's up for grabs because other people don't have people, lost their people, lost their skill base, their quality people, and may or may not be able to service to the level that they were servicing before COVID-19. So I think there's going to be opportunity out there, and the companies that come out of this with the skill set, the engagement, and the quality of workforce are going to have a significant advantage. I'm seeing a lot of organizations recruiting and looking for talent. I think early recovery firms are going to need people, and they're going to start cherry picking. Where are they going to cherry pick? Maybe from your company. And what I'm suggesting on the last page about over-communicate, overbuild engagement, stay in touch with your people, send them information, help them with filling out ROE forms, or sorry, EI forms, coaching them on information, all is going to pay dividends when you need them to come up and take off and get running. I'm also saying to people, we've learned a lot of lessons. So about termination clauses and ESA clauses and the right to lay off clauses and how things work in downturns and benefit programs, how do they apply? Have a peek at all your handbooks and employment agreements. Take some of these lessons learned and possibly offer some consideration to your employees. It doesn't have to be a lot. It could be $500. It could be a special retention bonus. It could be something. And fix the holes in your programs where your handbooks and employment agreements are not up to snuff with all the issues that have occurred. Change them, fix them, get them up to date. Don't forget about closing out any 2019 reviews and programs, especially the performance management systems. You don't want a hole where you have 2018 substandard, 2019 not done, and now I want to terminate in 2020. It's important that any performance reviews or programs for 2019, if you didn't get a chance to finish them off. If there's any changes in your 2020 plan, communicate it. Make sure people are aware of new goals, standards, requirements, expectations, and align any performance management systems or bonus plans or compensation plans to that reality. I think most organizations will have found that they really would have been better off if they had done some cross-training and development. Learn that lesson and try to spend a little bit of time, 5% of people's time around training, development, cross-training, building a stronger team, filling in your holes, backup, succession, whatever. And last but not least, now that I got you going on over communicating in the last slide, don't turn it off. I think for the next, once people come back to work for the next 6 to 8 months, your talent is going to be vulnerable. Keep them engaged, keep them close to you, keep communicating, and that should hopefully, if they get any other offers or any other outside inquiries, it may not just fall on deaf ears. And I think I'm into questions.
Mike, Loretta, if you could just flip to the next slide. I think there was an offer that you wanted to speak to, Mike.
Yeah. So one of the things that we're going to help out with HRAI, I hate that acronym. We got to change it a bit. My tongue gets stuck halfway through. But HRAI has graciously made arrangements for the rest of the month. Click it one more time. There's an email address. Thanks. For the rest of the month, it's hard to go to a webinar and then go, I forget what was on page 6 or whatever. Even if you have the slides, if you want any help or you need any guidance on a straightforward complimentary basis, just email us and we will, for the rest of the month, take care of any HRAI member and help you through any of the issues that you may be facing. Because every day, like today, an announcement comes out and then our phone lines lit up. They're bright red for the next 3 hours. So I'm sure the same issues will apply to you and we're happy to help.
Okay, Mike, thank you very much. And thank you for that excellent offer too. Hopefully some of the members on board will take you up on that offer. Before we close off, we have just a couple of minutes left. Just a couple of very quick questions. One is a note from a couple of members about the layoff rules in different provinces do vary. In Alberta, the temporary layoff is 60 days out of 120. Right. Noted that temporary layoffs in British Columbia are only allowed if the employee agrees to it. So
Right.
just worth making a note on that. And a question for you, if an employee tests positive and the employer sends him or her home to self-isolate, does the employer pay their wages or is it through EI?
No, that's the CERP program.
Okay.
That's what it was designed for. It's not a layoff of work. No, so, okay, here we go. Hopefully Francesco's off the line at this moment.
He is.
Look, I think employers are desperate to protect their employees and do what they can. So if it's technically not a layoff due to lack of work, code A on the ROE, then they're supposed to go to the CERP plan, and it's the catch-all place for everything that's not a traditional, I don't have work for you. So in this scenario, you do have work for them, they're just not fit to perform it. So they should go to the CERP plan. However, that plan is so overloaded, I think right now, that they may artificially bounce them back and forth between a program to get them covered, but it would be EI for sure.
Okay, and then we have one quick one about our upcoming holiday, Good Friday. I guess the question that prompted the question, do we need to pay stat pay to employees laid off but working the odd day?
If they are working that day, so EI will not pay for stat holidays. All right, so they will, somebody on EI and did no work this week will get 4 days pay. The employer technically has to pay that day. Actually, not technically, by law, they have to pay that day. Practically, doesn't always happen. But EI is only going to pay 4 days.
Okay. Mike, thank you so much. We have come to the end of the hour and a half. I want to thank you very much, and Kelsey kind of behind the scenes for providing this helpful walk through some of the questions and answers that you've been able to put together. Thank you again for the offer of follow-up support for members. We'll thank directly Francesco Sorbara for his contribution, and I can say that in follow-up, we've already been in communication with his office. There may be an opportunity to have a follow-up session as answers become available in time. You know, this is still very much a moving target, as everyone knows. The news changes almost daily.
Sure.
And finally, we will be posting this information online. We do not have permission to post the audio from Francesco's presentation, but we have got an agreement from his office to provide answers to all of the questions that were posed to the best of their ability, where answers are available. We'll post all of those answers to the questions that were asked on the COVID-19 Resource Center of the HRAI website as soon as possible. So thanks again, Mike and Kelsey. Thanks to Francesco, and thank you to all of you on the call who tuned in. Thanks for your support. And we'll sign off now, so stay tuned for more information and stay safe.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.